Welcome, Jeff Klein.
Hi, hello everybody. Um, as you all know, I try to follow the news about Palestine, Israel, and the Middle East very closely, and I'm feeling kind of overwhelmed since it's been a month since I made this presentation, and so much has happened. But
Wow.
um, well, the big contemporary story is the sort of ongoing but more acute starvation of Gaza that is receiving finally a lot of publicity that is hard to ignore, even in our pathetic mainstream press. Um, Scores of people have died of starvation already, especially children. And even if eventually supplies are let into Gaza, the long term effects of malnutrition will continue for a very long time, particularly for children, developmentally, mentally, and physically. There won't be a quick cure for the effects of this starvation. And of course, at the same time, uh, Israel's militarized method of distributing some supplies into Gaza is a source of chaos and more massacres around its websites. And I have to conclude that this is not an accident, but a feature of Israel's policy. Uh, the starvation, what is Israel's plan? The complete destruction, starvation, and demoralization of the population of Gaza, eventually leading them to being corralled in concentration camps in a small part of Gaza, and then desperate, maybe choosing, if they have the opportunity, to leave Gaza. Israel calls this voluntary emigration, and of course, it's anything but voluntary. Uh, this genocide, as more and more people around the world, even in our own country, continues. All the mainstream international aid groups have condemned Israel's policy in Gaza and its starvation policy. And I should point out, if it seems implausible that Israel could be so diabolical as to have this sort of elaborate plan to crush the people of Gaza, I would remind you that in 2006, when Israel first instituted its blockade on Gaza, a long time ago, uh, one of the chief spokespeople for the Israeli government, a head advisor to first Ariel Sharon and then Ehud Olmert, was very explicit and said they had calculated uh, everything that would be needed to preserve life in Gaza and were intent on keeping it on a calorie level. They were counting calories to the bare minimum. This is Dov Weissglass. He said that it would be like a visit to a dietitian. The Palestinians would be put on a diet. They won't die, but they will lose weight. Uh, and of course, we're seeing this sort of diabolical kind of plan being carried out today. You've all seen the pictures, which are very hard to see. So Israel is committing genocide, has been committing genocide in Gaza, and is now committing genocide by starvation. And uh, I would remind you that, you know, when there was a temporary ceasefire that Israel broke, again, in the mainstream, they say the ceasefire fell apart somehow. What didn't fall apart? Israel broke their agreement for a ceasefire, and they kept any food from going into Gaza for weeks and weeks and weeks. The intent was, I'm very certain, to make sure that any available stocks of supplies in Gaza were used up. And therefore, when Israel started this new depraved plan that we call the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, people would be desperate and have no alternative. Uh, and that, of course, is what has happened. And Israel is having a propaganda campaign now to blame the UN and the international agencies for the failure to distribute food in Gaza. But the reason is that most of Gaza, outside of these Gaza Humanitarian Foundation sites, is a free fire zone. And Israel has made sure that it's not possible to safely administer the distribution of aid anywhere in Gaza, even when it is successfully, inside of the Gaza Strip. They have attacked the guards to protect these supplies. They've financed gangs to loot them, and they kill people who are lining up, not just at their own sites, but at other sites as well. The UN says that 1,000 people have been killed at these aid sites in the last few weeks alone. So part of this, the fact that it's getting harder and harder to cover up this stuff, world opinion continues to move radically against support for Israel. In almost every country in the world, including the United States and especially in Europe, public opinion is strongly against Israel's policies, strongly critical of Israel, and strongly supportive of the Palestinian cause and of humanity. And that's the context that we should understand some of the recent developments internationally. You probably know that earlier this week, first 26, then 28, now 30 countries have supported a fairly strong statement condemning Israel's treatment of aid into Gaza, demanding a ceasefire and opposing any attempts to ethnically cleanse the population of Gaza. Of course, this is talk. It's strong talk, but no action. And I think that's the purpose of this thing, is to placate public opinion, but not do anything meaningful to stop what's going on in Gaza. And significantly, this statement, which was signed now by 30 countries, including nearly every European country except Germany, and Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and Japan have recently joined, is a sign that they are feeling the heat of public opinion. They're not ready to do anything meaningful, but they're feeling the heat and needing to respond. It's a lot like some of our politicians, the way they respond to public opinion on this. Eventually, they will say something, but not willing to do anything. More meaningfully, last week, there was a conference in Bogota, Colombia, called the Hague Group, that was led by Colombia and South Africa and others that are serious about applying the rules of international law to Israel, including a military embargo and sanctions, significant, meaningful international sanctions. And this conference was attended by 30 countries or so, including some important European countries like Spain and Norway and others. But the declaration demanding sanctions against Israel was only supported by 12 countries, mostly from the global south, or all from the global south: Bolivia, Colombia, Indonesia, Iraq, Libya, Malaysia, Namibia, Nicaragua, and South Africa, and a few others, smaller countries. So this is the first meaningful effort to hold Israel seriously accountable. And I think it certainly won't be the last. And eventually, probably some of these European countries that are wringing their hands now will be forced by their own population to take more meaningful steps against Israel. So, and if I'm leaving something major out, please point that out in the discussion. So also, obviously, in the West Bank, the violence against the Palestinians has been continually escalating. Another U.S. citizen was murdered by Israeli settlers with a very either mild or no response from the U.S. government. Israel has threatened to deport UN officials whose job it is to monitor human rights in Gaza and the West Bank. And just a day or two ago, the Israeli Knesset took a vote to adopt in principle that Israel should annex the West Bank. And the vote was 71-13 in favor of legally annexing the West Bank. There are talks ongoing about a ceasefire in Gaza. And the latest one suggests that there's some optimism the sticking point is that Israel wants a temporary ceasefire and the release of some of their prisoners, while the Palestinians in Gaza are demanding a permanent end to the war and Israel's withdrawal and the allowing of humanitarian supplies unhindered by Israel to enter. This is the sticking point. Israel so far is not willing to agree to a permanent end to its genocide in Gaza, other than a temporary truce, which will allow them to resume the genocide at their own convenience. And this is the sticking point. Israel's government, not just Netanyahu or even the most fanatical members of his government, Israel's society, as represented by its government, is majority in favor of ethnic cleansing in Gaza. And so far, there's no indication that they're willing to give this aim up, even to rescue their own citizens who are being held prisoner in Gaza. And in the U.S., of course, as public opinion moves more and more against Israel, we're seeing the repression that's going on everywhere at universities, public officials, nonprofits, and so on. And I think it's fair to say that Israel's political influence in the U.S. is a threat to whatever democracy we have left in our country. That their interests are in repression because they cannot win the argument of public opinion. They've lost that long ago. And their aim is to repress other opinions in the United States. And they're succeeding to a large degree as the leaders of our big universities bend the knee to Israel and try to take whatever message or methods are demanded by Israel. We shouldn't ignore that Israel is also continuing to invade Lebanon and Syria. Even though in theory in Lebanon there was a ceasefire agreement, Israel claims that there was a side letter from the U.S. that said they could break the ceasefire whenever they thought it was important to them, and they've been doing that virtually every day. They still occupy parts of southern Lebanon. And by the way, this is the fourth or fifth time that Israel has invaded Lebanon, depending on how you count. Israel has also further invaded Syria and bombed the capital of Syria, and they are continuing their policy. I don't have time to go to this in detail, but Israel's policy for a very long time was to weaken and fragment its Arab neighbor countries. This was, and they try to make ties to minorities within the Arab and Muslim world that can be allies of them. The Druze in Syria, the Maronite Christians in Lebanon, the Kurds in Syria and Iran and Iraq. And this has been their policy. And some of you, I doubt if many of you know, they succeeded in the case of Sudan in dividing the country and creating the new country of South Sudan, whose president made his first official act was to visit Israel and thank Israel for supporting their secession from Sudan. So we'll get to the legislative stuff, I guess, later. I'll have something to say about that. But just as a reminder, the circumstances demand and public opinion demands that we up what we are demanding of our political leaders. And a few years ago, talking about apartheid in Israel seemed very radical. Talking about genocide seemed radical. But I think our demand has to be a complete end to U.S. support, financial and military, to Israel, and otherwise rightly say that politicians who don't do that have blood on their hands and are supporting a genocide. And I bring that up because there was an amendment proposed to the National Defense Authorization Act to cut one part of aid to Israel, $500 million out of the $3.8 billion annually that goes to support Israel's production of missiles. And ironically, it was the amendment was proposed by Marjorie Taylor Greene, the sort of somewhat nutty, very right-wing representative from Georgia, and got only 6 votes Green, Massey, the other Republican, and only 4 Democrats. It was Ilhan Omar, Rashida Tlaib, Al Green from Texas, and very bravely Summer Lee from Pennsylvania, who does not have tenure yet in terms of her seat. And it was not supported by any other Democrats, including AOC, who has got a lot of pushback in social media, but nor with Ayanna Pressley or Jim McGovern. And Pressley typically has voted with the squad members on almost any issue, and she hasn't yet responded. I wrote to her staff, and she hasn't yet responded about that. So this is pitiful, really pitiful, and our demand should be much more radical. Anybody who votes for $1 for Israel at this point is complicit in genocide, and we need to make the point that this is not a matter of Israel being able to defend itself. These missiles that we're paying for are made in Israel. Israel can build as many missiles as they want, right or wrong. The question is, who should pay for them, Israelis or American taxpayers? And we need to hammer that home constantly. It's not a matter of Israel defending itself. It's a matter of who pays for it, us or them. So I'll stop now, and I might have something more to say when we deal with the legislative issues. And apologies again for going on so long. But a lot going on.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Questions and comments? Pat.
Hi, a couple things. One, Jeff, do you know why Presley and McGovern didn't vote for this? Because when I talk to my rep, I'd like to have a better understanding of that. And 2, I don't think we should allow ourselves to get too distracted by this, but nevertheless, it seems like the Epstein situation is related to the Israeli, to this whole issue. Mazen Hussein was saying months ago, as soon as Trump stopped doing everything that Netanyahu asked, or started doing it again, said that it was because of the tapes that Mossad had. And I don't think it's important we don't let ourselves get too distracted by that. But I think it also might be helpful for us to have some understanding of the connection and how that plays out. Thanks.
So I wrote to Presley's chief of staff, who I have known for a long time, I have a decent relationship with, and I shared that letter with some of you, maybe not all, asking what was the reasoning behind her failure to join the other squad members on this, and haven't heard back. And to be honest, I don't expect to hear back. I think politicians try to thread the needle on this stuff, and it is true that I think Presley and AOC and others ultimately will vote against the Pentagon appropriations bill where this stuff is contained. But this was a chance to take a stand on something very specific, and I think they failed. And this is not new, unfortunately.
Susan.
Jeff, do you know if the missiles that were at issue in this bill were air to air or air to ground? And I ask because I've heard that air to air could be described as purely defensive, whereas air to ground could also be quite offensive.
I can't answer definitively. I think mostly it's anti-aircraft and anti-missile missiles, because it's this $500 million has been appropriated year in and year out, and it's entitled appropriation for joint U.S.-Israeli missile defense.
So it might be considered air to air.
Yes, and people will justify claim that these are defensive weapons.
Yeah.
Well, whether they are or not, Israel doesn't have to ask us to pay for them. And of course, Israel has to defend itself because it starts wars every few years.
I'm just thinking the vote is not necessarily an indicator of how they would vote on other weapons. That's the only ray of hope that I'm seeing in it.
Yes. There is many of these people who didn't vote for this bill have co-sponsored another bill, the Block the Bomb bill, which is aimed at the more explicitly offensive parts of Israel. But I think in the kind of war that Israel is waging, there's not really a distinction between offensive and defensive weapons. I mean, defensive weapons allow them to start wars and defend themselves after they do. So to me, it's a false dichotomy, but politicians will be making that. AOC certainly did. She claimed these were defensive weapons and therefore she wasn't going to take a stand against them. But I think that's bogus myself.
Samantha, new voice among us.
Hi, as you guys were talking about that, about the offensive versus defensive weapons, I am curious, like if there's any way that we can work on educating the more general public about the fact that it really doesn't matter, because I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of the person who just said this, but that by giving, even if they are quote unquote defensive weapons, it still means that they have less reason to be restrained with their offensive weapons because they know they can. But a lot of like the general public just does not know that, and they just hear offensive, defensive, and think, and it also most importantly, I feel gives our politicians, even those who are progressive, this ability to sort of pass the buck. And like, so it's almost like it actually, like, it's doubly harmful that people don't know that that like is a ridiculous difference. But I don't know if there's a way of educating the public, or if people have ideas of, like, I don't know how to go about maybe correcting the record on that.
Well, we need to say what we're saying here and debunk the idea that this is about Israel's ability to defend itself. It's, this is the narrative, that we hear in Washington. This is about getting the U.S. to pay for Israel's ability to defend itself. And we need to hammer that home again and again. Unfortunately, the only people in Congress who are saying that are a few Republicans. And I have not heard a single Democrat ever talk about that, why it's justified for $1 of U.S. taxpayer money to subsidize Israel's military budget. That's what this aid is about. And of course, you all know, I'll say again, Israel is a rich country. It has a per capita GDP higher than nearly every European country that's an ally of the United States. They have universal health insurance. They have cheap higher education. And yet we are subsidizing their military budget to the tune of many billions of dollars a year. Without those subsidies, they could still build anything they want, but Israeli taxpayers would have to pay, not U.S. taxpayers. And that could have an effect on their willingness to start wars.
I just was wondering maybe if, like, because, a lot of people don't follow like the ins and outs of some of these issues in the news and even in social media. So I was just thinking more along the lines of, like, is there a way that we can, instead of we have to do both, but like, if there are ways that we could make sure the general public understands and sees through this, like, in a very simple, concrete way, because a lot of times, like, we only get a few seconds of an opportunity to inform regular people who aren't involved. They need to know, like, the first part before they'll understand the second, if that makes any sense.
It doesn't take very long to say what I just said. Why should U.S. taxpayers pay for Israel's military budget? And I think when it's framed that way, you won't find many people who say, oh, yeah, we should do that. We should send them billions of dollars of our tax money so that they don't have to spend it.
So I'm going to come in with a comment on this. I mean, I support your point, Jeff, but I do not think it is the only point that can be made against this kind of funding. So, the mainstream Democrats consider Israel an ally of the United States. So they might very well be inclined to support it, regardless of who pays for it. That's like a separate argument. So I think we also have to make the case in connection with this, that it's not just the defense, that they're not, the whole notion that they have to be defended is ridiculous. They've plastered every country in their neighborhood, and they've done it with relative ease and impunity. So sure, they could, like, why do they even need air-to-air missiles in the first place? They've already wiped out the Iranian Air Force, from what I understand. I mean, maybe conceivably, like, the UAE might have an air force if they fight some other country, but it's far-fetched to say that Israel needs air-to-air weapons for defense. And it's equally far-fetched. It's, I mean, it's a little more complicated to make the case they don't need ground-to-air missiles against Iranian missile attacks because Israel started it. And so I think I kind of agree with her that we should make these points. And if we're going to raise it's the congressional peace groups like FCNL that think or even the progressive members of Congress that think we should not focus on the defensive weapons, but only challenge Israel's offensive weapons. It's like old thinking. It's like and so we have to make that case that the whole Israeli project is out of control, and we have to, So anyway, I'm coming around to saying I think we should write an article on this, making the point about which taxpayers pay for it, but also about the whole principle of allying with Israel and so on in their wars and supplying them with weapons. And also, I think there could be, let's say, a reel or a slideshow, an Instagram, communication of these points. If somebody would write up an outline, I think some of our interns might be interested in working that up. So I'll just throw that out there as a suggestion. Maybe we can come back to how to get it done. But I think it's
I don't disagree, except the argument about who should pays for it is just rarely heard. It's just not part of our political discourse, and I think that's something it's something that I think would be widely supported. Whereas, there might be some sympathy, right or wrong, for Israel defending itself, quote unquote. So yeah, I mean, we need to say all of those things.
Yeah, I'm agreeing. Noble.
I was thinking back of the arguments over the ABM treaty years ago. I think people did understand that the ABM was really an offensive weapon, even though it was framed as a defensive thing. And I mean, this is a much smaller scale, obviously, but I think some of the principles apply. I mean, there is a question, why do they want these? And it's not just, there's a question of who's paying for it, sure, but evidently they want this stuff. And I think what you said earlier, Jeff, is also true, that it gives them the kind of the impunity to strike, whoever they want.
I mean, look, there are lots of bad actors among the countries of the world, and we don't have control over a lot of them. But Israel is the only one that we finance. We have lots of allies, for better or worse, in Europe, in the Middle East, in Asia, and we don't subsidize any of their military budgets.
Wait a minute. We send stuff to Taiwan. We've been sending stuff to Ukraine like crazy, although Trump is changing that. I think we even send military aid to Egypt, don't we? I don't know. We used to.
We do. I'm just saying, in terms of our allies, we have lots of allies, quote unquote, around the world, and we don't subsidize their military budgets. You could name any country in Europe, for example, who's a NATO member. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, there's a bigger picture of the U.S. sort of arms dealing around the world and subsidies, but Israel is kind of unique in that respect, to my mind.
Okay, seeing no more, let's go on to the political and legislative. I'm just going to quickly change the recording. 1 second.